All righty. So, Liliana, this topic, as you see, it sort of sits heavy on my heart because South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. Our Gini coefficient is, well, officially, we are the most unequal country there is on the planet. So we have a lot of inequality, and we're a fairly bifurcated nation in many ways. So, you know, it's kind of normalized for us, and it's good to be able to just take a step out and look at it and say, well, it's not normal actually, but what can we do with it? Or it is normal, but it shouldn't be normal. So I'm just going to take you through a quick visual of some aspects of what our education landscape looks like, and then we can have a chat. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as I've said in the topic, how can we stop this reproduction of social inequalities, you know, which is perpetuated through an unequal school system, because our students are not having equal experiences and definitely not equal educational outcomes. So we're just perpetuating a lot of the problems that our country sits with in terms of skill shortages, capacity, all sorts of things. So it really is a very vicious cycle that I would love to, you know, to get out. And I do work quite a lot in finding ways to leverage our privilege, because where the school that I'm at is one of the very privileged ones that you'll see. So just stop me anytime if you want to ask questions or comment, or we'll keep it very informal if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
So, oopsie, now it's not letting me. There we go. So we've got, as I said, a very fragmented education system. We have quite a lot of independent schools. So they are sort of regulated by the state in a broad way, but not in a day-to-day way. Then we have state schools, and they're regulated on what's called the quintile system. There's 5 levels, and it all depends on what their economic situation is like, where they are. It's got to do with allocation of resources and money and student fees and that sort of a thing. So level 1 school is fully functional, everyone can pay the fees. A level 5 would be your very poor schools where very few parents can pay the fees, and then, you know, they're fully subsidized. I don't know too much of the detail, but that's, you know, roughly what we're sitting with. Then we have, within that state school, we have something called former model schools, Model C schools. So those are schools in the suburban areas where, you know, when apartheid was active and there was segregation, spatial segregation, the former Model C schools were in the white areas, in the suburban areas. Then, of course, in 1994, those all desegregated, and they are fairly well resourced, fairly well, you know, they function quite well. And it's quite an aspiration for some of the less privileged people in our country to even get into a C school. So that is. Sorry.
C schools, are they state schools or are they independent?
They're state schools. So everything, we've got independent schools, and then everything I'm showing you after that is state schools. Yeah. So those are in the townships. They you know, so spatially they're in close proximity to a lot of the independent schools. Quite a few of the independent schools are also in semi-rural areas, and that's also quite an interesting dynamic. Oopsie, sorry. Then we have what is known as township schools. So in the former areas where our Black people were confined under apartheid, and they were not allowed into white areas, then we have schools there. But, you know, historically, the government deliberately underfunded schools for people who were not white. So that's part of the system that we still live with, unfortunately. And then we have rural schools, and sometimes schools that were on people's farms. Way back historically, if a farmer had a school on his property, he was not allowed to, the children were actually prevented by law from studying beyond grade 7, year 7. So they would go, you know, the farmer would have them on the property. They would be the children of the laborers. And then they would be allowed to go to school up until about grade 7, year 7, and then they would have to go and work on the farm. So those schools are now, many of them have been taken over, well, all of them, I think, are under the regulation of the state and are subsidized to a varying or lesser degree. But some of them are great, some of them are terrible. So that's part of our heritage. So I'm just going to show you a few visuals to give you an idea. So this is a school that is it's basically built on South Africa's gold and diamond history. It's right in the heart of the wealthiest part of Johannesburg. I think it's actually a national monument designed by some famous architect. But ironically, behind it is one of the worst inner city poor areas of Johannesburg. So this is South Africa's reality. We have extreme poverty right next to extreme wealth. Yeah, that's what it is. So that's a fairly old school. Another one, this is Hilton College. This is in Natal. It would have been a sort of a school in the countryside many years ago, but township creep is happening. So that is really beautiful. This is, I actually was there for quite a number of years. Then, that's, can you see the heading? So part of that school, it's about 1,700 hectares. It actually has an official game reserve on the school. So that is a picture of my son way back in the game reserve at his school. So they do all sorts of functions in the game reserve. And that's one of South Africa's major rivers, actually. So he's the one who went to Australia, but he didn't find this kind of river in Australia, so he came back. So there's that. That was a school for boys. Both of those are boys only schools. So monastic education is quite big here, especially amongst the church schools. This is an Anglican school. This is a secular school, but it has a chapel on it. This is a school for girls, so it would be in close proximity to the previous one for boys. It's also an independent school. You can see quite a lot of colonial influences in the architecture. This now we're moving on to the government schools. So all of those were independent schools. Their operational, day-to-day running is entirely under their control, pretty much. This is a government school that I worked at, a former Model C school. This is actually quite similar, you can see, to the independent schools. It's in good shape, it's well run, but it's state controlled. That's just me in the classroom. So the point about this is the picture on the left was when I was a teacher there. Although it's this government school, these girls have all gone on to do great things. So the education was great. This is taken in 2009. This picture on the right, that is my school in Cape Town, which I was actually sitting there in my English classroom. It hasn't changed at all as a learning environment since 1982 when I left. It is still the same. So these schools don't change much. They kind of carry on the way they were. In terms of a learning environment, there's not a lot of money to pump into them. This is a school in Soweto. So this is what we would call a township school. This one still looks pretty good. So Soweto is a massive township satellite to Johannesburg. It's where Nelson Mandela lived, Desmond Tutu, a lot of the struggle happened there. But it's, the fact that the townships are separated from the other economic hubs is very problematic. But this is still a great looking school. Okay, I'll show you a couple of more pictures that are a bit scary. It's looked after, and they're doing what they can. Unfortunately, many of our schools look like that. There is huge problems here with misdirection of funds, lack of capacity, corruption, lack of willpower. Many schools don't have running water. Many schools don't have toilets. And there's no money to provide security for vandalism. There's no money to maintain, or no willpower, or no management, operational capacity, no governance. The governance structures in a lot of our schools are very weak. So sadly, that is the reality of a lot of our students, or they're in very overcrowded classrooms like this. So, getting 60 kids into a class is not uncommon. There's not enough desks, there's not enough textbooks, there's not enough resources. That pretty much says it all. So that's probably a rural school somewhere, although it could be what we call a peri-urban school as well. So the majority of our population, our young children, will be learning like this. Which is why for me, as the sessions have gone on, and the very notion of what an innovative learning environment is very problematic. As you can see, there cannot be one idea of what it is. This is a school back in KwaZulu-Natal. It's another independent school. It's very close to the one that my son was at, the one with the river and the nature reserve. Also a farm, a lot of farmers would send their sons there. It's a boys' school. And it's surrounded by, so it's in a farming community, but it's surrounded by townships, by very poor squatter communities, informal settlements that have sprung up. So again, we have a situation where there's tremendous wealth and privilege right alongside abject poverty and need. And what's happening in our landscape is the independent schools, the wealthy schools, are starting, or have started long ago, to try and uplift the communities around them, the people, because a lot of the people that work and service schools like this will live in very poor, living conditions. So it's not sitting well with schools with ethics that the privilege doesn't spill over into where it's needed most. So a lot of schools have got community engagement programs where they work and they partner with local schools and try and make a difference. And I'll show you one of those now in a moment. So that's the very wealthy school. Just around the corner, literally from it, is this school, which was an old farm school. And luckily the farmer way back when, he was a bit of a maverick, and he ignored the government's rules, and he actually developed the school and allowed the children to go beyond grade 7, year 7, up into to year 12. But what you're seeing here is the school's food garden. Because the community is so poor, many of the children get their only meal at school, but they grow the food themselves. This is still a good school because although it's poor and they struggle, it's got 2 very good women running it, very capable women running it. So when I was there, I was doing some research with the University of Hull. Someone had donated a bank of toilets, mobile toilets, to the school, Shay O'Connor, and Shay O'Connor was the name of the farmer. And they'd installed the toilets because there were none before, or they were broken and the government didn't fix them, or there's no money. But to get to the toilets, the children had to cross a little wetland. And in this part of the world, summers are very wet, lots of rain, lots of mist. And the children would likely have only 1 pair of shoes and probably only 1 pair of socks. So to get their socks and shoes wet to go to the bathroom was not ideal. So the principal and deputy launched a competition amongst the students, because their mindset is they want to solve their own problems in their learning environment. So they launched a competition for a solution to be found, and 2 year 9 boys designed a bridge and got hold of the slats made from recycled plastic. And I met them and they were so proud of what they'd accomplished. So the kids had so for me, when I think of an innovative learning environment in this situation, having access to a toilet is part of an innovative learning environment. Having a meal is part of an innovative learning environment, because your student experience, if you can't go to the bathroom properly and you are hungry, is going to be bad. And that's the situation with most of the schools in our country, actually. So there you can see the principal's office. In the independent schools, the principal's office would be, really interior decorated, over the top, very plush and fancy, but not here. That is the inside of, I think, a grade 3, grade 4 classroom. They often have to combine classrooms because they're short of teachers. So it's a learning environment. Is it innovative? I don't know. Yeah. That's just more of what the kids are doing. I was in there looking at, we were putting a literacy program in there, training the teachers to help the children, because what's hard for these little ones, a number of African languages are spoken at home, very little English, but then when they come to school, they get taught in English. So it's really tricky for them. Half of them do not know what they are being taught most of the time. So and they're trying to learn to read and write. It's tough. This is the school where I am based. So that's what I see if I look out my window right now while I'm talking to you, because I live on the premises of the school. So that's another thing. These wealthy schools, the independent ones, house their staff on their property. So teachers, it's how they attract good teachers. So again, by implication, part of an innovative learning environment, if one's not looking at the actual material landscaping of it and the architecture, is having great teachers. So the independent schools scoop up the best teachers in the country because they can look after them. They pay for them, they give them a house, they educate their children for free. So that's also another strand of the inequality. That's Sandton. You might have heard of it. Sandton is the richest square mile in the African continent. Huge wealth here. So we have the luxury in our school of being able to design fancy new classrooms. That there's the conceptual picture, and then as it was starting to be developed, this is our little girls preparatory school. So from year 3 to year 7. I was the acting head there for a year. This happened while I was there. So this is the same school. The picture on the left, the kids were doing an inquiry-based lesson. This was the provocation. So you can just see there's QR codes, there's iPads, it was in the library, there's books, there's TV, there's everything you can want. Everything is safe, occupational health and safety dealt with, all of that sort of a thing. On the picture where the girls are running, this was actually a maths lesson outside my office. They were learning about ratio and proportion. This picture down there where they're looking at animal parts, we actually, it was again a provocation. They were starting to learn about their bodies, and the teacher there in the white lab coat had gone to a local butchery and got all sorts of animal organs, and the children were looking at the animal organs and there were hearts and lungs and kidneys and livers, and because it was my amazing body, and that was the start of it. Was in our science lab. So we've got 3 classes in there combined, and in between there were programs. They were looking up digestive systems on their iPads using, I forget what the thing is called, it was a special computer thing that you held under your iPad, and it showed a virtual digestive system. Then the last picture on the bottom right, under COVID, we have a bush school way out, about 300 kilometers out of the city. And our staff were not working because no one could go on camp under COVID. So they brought their facilitators to work in the city. And I said, well, the facilitators are here. Let's do outdoor education on our campus. So they came and they ran typically outdoor education type of activities on our campus. Our campus is 105 hectares. It used to be a farm. And we've got a lot of natural trees and blue gums, actually a lot of blue gums. It was a blue gum farm way back when for the mines. So all of these things, and this is just a snapshot of a tiny, tiny part of our school and the kind of teaching that can happen there. So we really are immensely privileged. This is our bush school. So it's a farm that we lease to the north of where we are in Johannesburg. The bottom picture there is a very African thing. It's a discussion tree. So when meetings would need to happen amongst the elders, they would sit under a tree like that. So that's our outdoor classroom. Our kids go there in various grades. Grade 5, they have a camp. In year 9, they go there for 3 weeks. And they do all sorts of things. It's a typical outdoor education experience. So that is one of our 8 schools. We have 8 schools. Our bush school is one of them. So that's another aspect of what a whole different kind of learning environment is. It's really, really exceptional. There's animals, there's all sorts of things they do there. They learn about nature, but they also learn team building, teamwork. And of course, it's a personal development journey because there's a lot of things they're not allowed their cell phones, and they have to, cook on a budget and cook for themselves and stay out overnight with all the baboons and the jackals howling and all of that sort of thing. So it's conquering your fears things, bit of Kurt Hahn going on there. And then we also have, so this is what I was talking about, a lot of the wealthy schools are putting together, trying to find a way to leverage their resources to enhance the experience of children in the state system. So again, you know, they come onto into our learning environment, and for one day a week on a Saturday, they become and they experience what it's like to learn in a very privileged environment. And psychologically, it's very important for these children to come out of their dysfunctional situation and to imagine and to be exposed to that there's a different way of living, a different aspiration, a different school experience. So they come into our classrooms, we have teachers that teach them, we give them, you know, we provide stationery and all that sort of thing. And what is really interesting for the purposes of this discussion and this topic is how these children's achievements academically skyrocket compared to when they are not, you know, joining these lessons. And it's only once a week, although, you know, it's a bit of a flipped classroom situation since COVID, and they do more now during the week online. So that's another aspect I haven't included here, is the online has merged quite a lot as a learning environment with the actual physicality of a learning environment. So I think that is all. Yeah, I'll stop there. Would love to hear your, you know, your feedback and your experiences of different learning environments. So I see we've got Sarah, Lena, and sorry, I can't see. It's Liana. Hey, Liliana. Yes. Yeah. So that's me.
I was curious, how did students kind of get selected for the Saturday school program? Are they part of particular schools or?
It's a great question. No, we would put notifications out on various channels, social media, because most people in South Africa do have a mobile phone. Our data is ridiculously expensive. So that is another sort of tangential challenge to what a learning environment post-COVID needs to look like. So, but sorry, to your point, word gets out that we are opening and registering students, and then they're trying to move it to online. So they might have made some progress in that space, but previously they would literally flock onto our school on a given day, up to 10,000 of them, to try and apply, and then it was pretty much first come, first served. Very sad to have to turn them away. I taught for a term in the program, and it was an experience.
Yeah. And so these kids are obviously attending school during the week, and then they're doing an extra day just to get the opportunity to experience sort of this exceptional schooling environment, basically.
Yeah, and we've started to add to the program. So before it was just lessons in English, maths, physics, accounting, and life science, maybe business studies. The teachers that teach in there are volunteers who teach mostly in other independent schools, and some of them are state school teachers. And then, but what we've started to do is to encourage the kids to stay on after school, because they have to travel very far to get here quite often. They, you know, bus themselves or come by taxis, and transport is expensive. Our petrol price is through the roof. So what we're trying to do is get them playing sports. So we've opened the basketball courts, the soccer fields, so that they come in for a day, experience what it's like to have school in a very privileged environment. We also, you know, doing clubs with them, extramural clubs, because as you know, with education, a lot of people, it's got to be an intervention and an interruption in what they believe is possible, because these children are so locked into a dysfunctional environment that they're not exposed to other possibilities. I did quite a bit of work in Natal at one stage, looking at curriculum responsiveness across an entire education pathway in the engineering field. And I explored a company there that manufactures farm equipment, huge, massive, heavy industrial farm equipment. And they have a relationship with a number of stakeholders to get into the deep rural areas where the schools are, And I interviewed some of the people that had come into they train people in art to be artisans. So they go into the community, they find the people, they work with the school system, and then they get them into the company. It's called Bell Equipment. It's in a place called Richards Bay. And I interviewed some of the students who were there. And I remember very clearly one young man said to me, he was, when the AIDS pandemic or epidemic was really, really rampant, South Africa was the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic at one stage, particularly Natal, where this company is. And this young boy was what they call a child, part of a child-headed household. So the parents had died. There was no one to look after him. And he said, I remember someone from Bell Equipment came and told me that I could be something else. And he said, could be an artisan, could be a welder or a fitter and turner. He said, I didn't know about those things because when my parents died and there was no money, he said, I thought I would either become a criminal or I would open what is called here a spaza shop. So that's it's literally a kiosk that you would pop up and sell one cigarette at a time or one orange at a time. So in his mind, from his experiences, there were only two options to him, criminal or a spaza shop. He said, and then Bell Equipment came and told me I could carry on going to school and I could, study through a technical college and I could carry on studying in Bell's company. So he was nearly qualified when I met him. He was wanting to become a mechanical engineer and to open his own business. So when we bring these students onto our campus, very intentionally, it's to say to them, your life can be different. This can be yours, or your children's. So yeah, it's important. So that's why you can see that the notion of defining a learning environment, never mind an innovative learning environment, it's so complex in our situation. So yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea the range of this kind of the school spectrum in South Africa, and even the idea of those farm schools, which I can now picture sort of how those used to function, and the thinking behind the farm school. I'm kind of making sense of that, and just the discrepancy that alone would have created, just varying it so much by virtue of who was in charge of that farm, who owned the farm. And yeah, I guess my initial reaction when you started presenting was something you did talk about, which was this idea of having teachers go to kind of neighbouring schools and develop, I guess, communities of practice. You gave it another name, but this idea of, I guess, embedding practice in these underprivileged locations, these underprivileged schools, these environments that are not even conducive to learning. I think, though, there is that much more basic need that you described, like this idea of sanitation and access to basic sort of safety, health and safety. And I mean, that's sort of, that needs, I think, is much like, that's so much the foundation to building from there and going, okay, now that we've got this safe environment, what can we actually do in it that is actually going to make it a learning environment? It's almost, that's sort of the thing that struck me. Of course, you've given this much more thought than I have. You've just presented this to me, this past half hour. But I mean, what's your, what is the general movement or feeling in South Africa about this, the state of these schools that like the township schools, some of them, for example? Is there this sense of hopelessness that there's no way to improve those conditions, that they're too plagued by sort of what you're talking about, this idea of mismanagement, and that nothing can be done to kind of set that standard?
So that's a really insightful question. So let me think. The answer is quite complex, so bear with me. So the cynical / realistic answer amongst many people is that the government are completely incapable of fixing it. They cannot. South Africa spends more than just about any country in Africa. You know, I could get all the statistics, but I do know that we spend more than just about any other African country per student on education, but our results are the worst. Okay, I think in the TIMS and the Pearls and those sorts of you know, analytics, we are, if not at the bottom, very near the bottom. So we're in this cycle where there is money, but it's not being deployed properly. So, and a lot of corruption. So where things are is amongst people with willpower in the private sector and in the NGO space. And there's a lot of NGOs, there's a whole cluster of them, all trying to make a difference in various ways, either with or without partnering with the government. But amongst a certain strand, there's a sense, and this is my own belief, and it's what I'm busy with a project at the moment, a very key project with repositioning our online school. I believe that we have to give up on the government pretty much, and they are not going to fix it. And the public and the private sectors have to partner and fix it. So in South Africa, that's pretty much what we do as a nation, since, you know, as the hope of the end of apartheid has kind of spiraled into frustration, outrage, despair at the mismanagement and the state, what we call state capture, where our former president pretty much destroyed the infrastructure of the country and took a lot of the money and dispersed it to his cronies to keep him in power. We are now sitting with a situation where we have this parallel system. So getting back to the issue of safety, our schools are not safe. South Africa is not safe at all. So one of the problems in particularly the poorer schools, what happens is someone will come and donate a whole lot of computers, for example, but then they don't have the money to pay for the private security firm to guard the computers. And so the computers get stolen, because the other system that doesn't work in our country is the police force. The police force is ridiculously corrupt. No one trusts them. Most people are terrified of them. So we have a shadow police force. We have a whole network of private security companies that if you are wealthy enough, you employ them to look after you. But the poorer communities don't have that. And there's such desperation around them that people will do anything and steal anything to try and meet their family needs. So those schools are not safe. So that in itself is a huge problem. It adds another dimension to it. So I think in a nutshell, to answer your question, the people who are applying their minds to this and who have an ethical conscience, which is many people in our education system, are finding ways to circumvent the government or to maneuver them into a partnership and build a relationship where we can hopefully access some of the funding, or at least access the leverage and build a relationship where they come on board. So Hilton College, which is the one where my son was, the river one, they have a program where they've built structures on the private school. They've built very good relationships with the schools, the poorer schools in the area. So this is another dimension of our education system. It's very politicized and it's full of cronyism. So what happens is, and it's very fluid depending on which political person is in charge. So the way it's structured, the local politicians, the local not tribal, but community chiefs. So we call them indunas. So they're people in these communities that have a lot of power. The politics control the education. So we'll have a situation where a vacancy will come for a principal or a teacher. A certain politician will want his aunt or uncle or nephew or niece to have a job there. And they will put that person in that position. Even if they're completely incompetent, they will go into that position. Some teachers, if they want to apply, they've even been killed. Teachers get killed here for applying for jobs that someone else has earmarked. So if you want to get something done as a private entity, you have to figure out where the power dynamics are, and you have to build relationships with those people. So the school in Hilton, the very wealthy school, has got very good relationships with the politicians and the people in the education district. So what that enables them to say, right, we want your science and your maths teachers for a whole term. They bring them onto the campus. It's a boarding school. They've actually erected, and they're busy erecting a second one, an entire lodge where these government teachers are trained, they're housed, they become part of the independent school. They get exposed to better teaching, better resources, and then they go back into their schools to improve the outcomes in that, in those poorer schools. So that is a really substantial and worthwhile project. So that's the kind of thing that many of the independent schools and the higher education institutions also have. We call it community engagement. So
Right.
they have these projects, where it's partnering with a number of stakeholders to try and do what you can, because a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, okay, well, we'll just give money, or we'll give books, or we'll give computers, but it doesn't work like that. And very much part of the African mindset is, if you want to benefit one, you have to benefit all. I'll give you an example. Rhodes University ran a program where they wanted to go into a settlement, into a nearby community. They're in the Eastern Cape, what we call the Eastern Cape. And part of it was, here, we'll run a day of free literacy training for your teachers, and we'll bring lunch. They got completely blocked in that community. And the reason was that the people didn't want a free lunch, because if someone came and donated a free lunch, it meant the woman over the road from the venue who earns her living by selling food would be harmed. So that you've got to know things like that. So you go and you say to that lady, okay, you provide the lunch. So they don't want white saviors. White savior mentality does not work. It's complex. So, yeah.
So it depends on the community. Each community might have a different sort of arrangement or different setup with their, they sort of, the codependencies within the community are going to vary from place to place. And it's a matter of understanding those unique features, I guess, like this example of, the lunch lane, the shop across the road that makes their living off the school, buying their lunches there. I guess something you mentioned earlier, I don't know, this was kind of when I jumped on the call, about science and maths teachers in particular, that you're having, as a nation, a lot of trouble, I guess, encouraging people to train as science and maths teachers. We experience the same thing in Australia when we talk about teacher shortages in certain parts of the country. The sciences and the maths tend to always be the more difficult subjects to recruit into. And so you experience the same thing in South Africa. And is that a matter of perception in terms of career progression for graduates, or what do you think is behind that?
Again, it's really complex. So it's part of the inherited inequality from apartheid. We still very much have the ramifications of that. And it plays out in that, before, under apartheid, Black people of color were prevented from studying anything that was very, very difficult or very abstract, any of those fields, those prestigious fields. The only things they were allowed to go to university for were social work and teaching, if I remember correctly. So now what's happened since the end of apartheid is that the very prestigious professions, engineering, lawyer, accountant, those are the three stalwarts, doctor, those four, doctor, engineer, accountant, lawyer. They are the most sought after professions. So everybody will apply for those very complex positions. No one's really applying to be a teacher. So that's the one thing, never mind a maths or a physics teacher. The other thing is that because of the cycle of undertrained teachers and poor teaching and learning environments, the rates of achievement of mathematics and science at school are really, really, really low. So the students it's impossible for them to get into university. Many of their current maths teachers can't do the maths they're trying to teach themselves. They can't do it because they were not taught properly. So we're in this really vicious cycle of there aren't the teachers to teach the subjects.
Yes.
So that will carry on unless, again, there's some sort of an intervention. Yeah, so... Sorry.
Okay. And do you think that, I mean, you mentioned that data is very expensive. So I'm just flipping ideas through my head about, you know, you were talking about the move to like online, which was maybe a result of encouraged by COVID, particularly for the Saturday school offering. And is that in terms of access and this challenge of data being very expensive in South Africa, do you see that that presents a possibility, like if that problem could be solved, would it open up, I guess, an avenue for students and, you know, in terms of being able to access education online? Or is that just inconceivable? I don't even know how likely that is, how possible that is.
No, that is. So that is very much, that is my major project at the moment. On Tuesday, I'm meeting with a company called Valencia Institute. So have you heard of, you must know Get Smarter, the online course program series of programs?
I don't actually.
Okay, it started in South Africa. It's been bought out by U2. I think they own Coursera and Udemy and those sorts of things. So why I'm telling you that is that the EdTech company who started that, they then sold it, and they are now, there's a new company that the CEO started called Valencia Institute. And their vision, they were our educational partner for our online school. So in 2020, we started at a whole separate online school offering the Pearson curriculum, because this was our thinking, and we didn't know where COVID was going. But it was pretty exclusive. Anyway, so we have a relationship with this EdTech company, Valencia Institute. We are engaging with them and our government department to replicate Stithians in what's known as micro schools. So we will work we are going to attempt to work with the government to get corporate funding, the government's say so to go into their schools, our governance and our ethos and the way we do education. And we want to go into dysfunctional schools and do exactly what you've outlined. Provision the schools with the computers they need, find a way to pay for the data, and get the kids learning online. Because Valencia Institute have partnered with the University of Cape Town and developed an entire government education online. And there's a paid version and a free version. So our vision is to create these micro schools, go around wherever we identify the needs are, and deliver online education, including the data and the equipment, although most people have their phones, to do exactly what you've suggested. Because, you know, from my perspective, so this is my own personal opinion, that, as I've said, the government is not going to do it. And Valencia Institute, the CEO and I work quite closely together. What he calls his big, hairy, audacious goal is to educate 100,000 South African students by the year 2028. So we are going full steam ahead. Goodbye, government. We'll just cozy up to you and try and, you know, get your money and have a good enough relationship with you so that we can get access to the schools and the teachers, which is what we need. And we will just move in and do the educating. It's a bit complex because there's no regulatory framework at the moment for online schooling, but we're all in there. So yeah, the online space has opened up a whole lot of new possibilities. But the government, I was in a meeting yesterday with the GDE, our local government department, and because they've pulled together a whole consortium of people to try and brainstorm ways of regulating the online environment. Because, you know, as you can imagine, the so-called schools have just mushroomed, but there's no one overseeing them and quality assuring them or anything like that. So, but, you know, the person from the government department who was chairing the meeting and supposed to be leading this work was not really on point with the whole online ecosphere and its implications for, you know, for a learning environment. So the job of blending the physical learning environment in these schools, like you saw, and the online learning environment as an innovative learning environment, it's quite a fascinating task. So we're also looking at ways of sidestepping those dreadful schools and maybe creating, you know, putting containers in communities and having school in there. So it's an interesting challenge, but yeah, it's also exciting. But South Africans are funny. We have these terrible problems, but then we kind of come up with some amazing solutions sometimes, and we just get on with it. We really do. We think, okay, there's a problem. Government's not going to fix it. Like potholes in the road. I mean, everyone goes mad about potholes in our roads here. So communities don't wait for the government. They get together and they fix their own potholes because, yeah, the faith in the government is at an all-time low to do anything, actually. Our hospitals are, yeah, anyway, don't get me started. It's on record, so I need to be careful. I have immense hope that our current president is getting things right. But the damage that Mr. Zuma and his cabinet and his cronies did to our country is really, really, really terrible. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, the betrayal of liberation. So that is definitely what our people are experiencing. Yeah, people who were supposed to look out for them and make their lives better have actually ended up making most of them a whole lot worse, sadly. Yeah. So that's it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I guess I'm also wondering, I mean, I just still have the image in my mind of the room with the broken windows, and I just keep thinking anything is better than that room, like seeing those broken windows. And I guess I don't know sort of what those rural, if it is in a rural community, what other sort of community buildings or facilities they have. And yeah, just something makes me think is, are there other locations? I mean, you gave the example of a container. Like, could we experiment with containers, you know, and are there other locations in these communities that could almost do double duty as a school during the day and as a different community resource at night? Or is that sort of is that not really a feasible thing? I don't know what these communities look like. So
they are terrible, many of them. They're absolutely terrible. The better ones do have, sometimes they have community centers, but a huge problem here is vandalism. There is no such thing as a safe environment in South Africa. Even our privileged school, our major headache is security. We have had armed robberies on the school property. We have people, you know, breaking in at 3 o'clock in the morning into people's houses because the staff live on the property. You know, so a mom had a gun put to her head in the car park of our girls' college as all the girls were coming out of the school. We've had a dead body on our property. So people come, you know, we've got children on kidnap watch, bodyguards with guns. So But in those communities, there are no safeguards. You know, it's the wild, wild west. It's the wild, wild south, really. People are, there's huge substance abuse problems. These people are desperately, desperately poor. A lot of them, you know, like in Natal, that one school, the little kids that you saw, a lot of the people in the informal settlement. So that's just a space that people decide to occupy. They find corrugated iron or plastic or sheeting or whatever they can. They erect a structure. There is no infrastructure, so there's no sanitation. And then as the structure grows, if they're lucky, someone will come in and put a, you know, bank of mobile toilets or something like that. So those are the extreme, you know, we call them squatter shacks, squatter settlements. But in some of the sort of more established, maybe more planned communities, there might be a town hall, there might be a church, but that not in the rural areas, you know. So again, the question we're asking here at St. Stithians, and I ask quite a lot, is our classrooms sit empty in the afternoon. And we have settlements like that. So half an hour away from where I live in the richest mile of Africa are desperately poor people in informal settlements, literally 30 minutes away, if not closer. We are partnering with some of the schools in those communities already, or some of the people in there. But you know, the question we have to ask is, why don't we get them onto our property in the afternoons? Our classrooms are empty. We have 5 schools on one place, you know, 5 lots of different buildings we can use to educate another 2,500 students in the afternoons or in the evenings. But it all comes down to, well, how are we going to keep everybody secure? If, you know, we have a lot of staff living on our property, a lot of things go on. So, and our parents pay a lot of money for that. So if we want to then run a parallel school, well, who's going to, you know, we're going to have 2,500 strangers coming into our property with their connections or their, you know, families or whatever. We have no way of keeping our community safe. Not that we think everyone is bad, but it's just the reality of South Africa. So that is a constraint. You know, it's difficult to share what you have if you're trying to keep it safe for the people who pay for what they want. It's tricky, but we go into the community. So there's 1 or 2 schools that we've pretty much started, and we, you know, it's an early childhood development center, and it's a small school. So quite a lot of our parents would do volunteer work there, and you know, but it's more, those are more acts of charity. They're not transforming the learning environment. So the radical transformation of the learning environments for the students is what is the biggest challenge. And it's a really, really complex. I'm just giving you a tiny little spot of the complexities, but I'm an optimist. I think if there's willpower, and certainly there is amongst the independent sector and the private sector. So we have people saying, we want to give money, you know, but they don't want to give money until the governance structures and the regulatory frameworks and everything are solid. So yeah, Tuesday next week, I'm having a meeting with a man who works for a company called Educational Partnerships, and we are looking at ways to structure a different kind of engagement with these communities so that we can do online schooling and provide them with online schooling. It's part of our social responsibility. We have to make South Africa better. We have to. Anyway, I think our time is up. It is up, exactly. Thank you for your questions and your interest. It was lovely to chat. And I haven't had any chance to ask you about your work and what you do there. So forgive me for that.
Well, that's okay. Hi, Kelly.
Hello. Hello, I'm still here. I'm moving about. I've been listening the whole time. It's very interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Adrienne.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.